Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video with me, John from EP History. Today we're going to be doing another look at one of my uniforms from my collection, and today we have a rather interesting uniform. To be honest, I actually personally haven't seen many of these types of jackets before. I know that they're quite rare, especially one from this period, and that is actually a 1930s Royal Australian Navy ball jacket, worn at formal occasions such as uh, balls, ceremonial dinners, stuff like that. Something where you need a bit more classy than a mess dress. In this particular example, as we'll get into in a minute, was actually owned by quite a significant figure in the Australian Navy during World War II and the Korean War. But anyway, I digress. So without further ado, we're going to get into talking about the history of who owned this jacket and what they did and why they're so significant. So this jacket was owned by a man named John Plunkett-Cole. He was born on the 4th of September 1906, and whilst he was too young to serve in the First World War, Plunkett-Cole always had a fascination with all things Navy. So much so that growing up as a teenager and even as an older kid, he was in the Navy Cadets and he attended he completed junior Navy studies. So all this came into his late teen years when, on the 15th of May 1924, John Plunkett-Cole enlisted as a midshipman in the Royal Australian Navy. Now, at the time, so in the 1920s, the Australian Navy was pretty small, and as a result, we actually didn't have enough ships to train our own junior officers. This is a problem that would actually go on and last into the 1950s, and so when we had junior officers, we would actually attach them to the Royal Navy in England, and we would send them away to complete their studies with the Royal Navy. And John was no exception. And so once he enlisted as a midshipman, he was attached to the Royal Navy and he was sent off to England where he completed his training to become a sailor and to become a naval officer. So this lasted until in the 15th of September 1926, when upon completing his initial junior officer training, he was promoted to the rank of sub-lieutenant and returned to the Royal Australian Navy. Basically, he stayed with the Royal Australian Navy, and on the 19th of June 1928, he was commissioned as a full lieutenant into the Royal Australian Navy, and essentially began his career of basically rising all the way to the top by the end of it. So fast forwarding a little bit until sorry guys, I am going to be looking down to refer to my notes here. Until April 1934, John was once again attached to the Royal Navy to complete further training. It is actually around this time that this jacket was actually made, and although you guys won't be able to see it, in the pocket in here, it actually has the manufacturing date as 1933. So he had this made relatively right before he returned to England to serve with the Royal Navy. According to his son, he actually had this made and wore it for his wedding. And upon being married, his wife would actually accompany him around the world as he was transferred to back and forth between England and Australia for various assignments and training. So he remained in England until January 1936, upon which he returned to Australia and yet again took up a position with the Royal Australian Navy. However, it was not to last, and on the 30th of March 1937, he was promoted to Lieutenant Commander, and again in June 1938 was sent back to England to once more take on training with the Royal Navy. This is actually the last time that he'll be sent to England for training, and for the remainder of his time in England, he would actually end up serving with the Royal Navy at the start of the outbreak of World War II. When World War II broke out, Lieutenant Commander Plunkett-Cole, who was stationed in northern England, was assigned to the HMS Sussex, and for the opening months of the war, served upon that ship as a senior officer. The Sussex was lightly damaged, and on the 18th of September was 1940 was docked in Edinburgh Harbour undergoing repairs. On this night, John took the chance of some quiet time in the docks to take his wife to see a screening of Gone with the Wind in Edinburgh. The movie was fantastic, and upon returning to the ship afterwards, he found the entire ship engulfed in flames after a German U-boat had sailed into Edinburgh Harbour and set off a bomb on the side of the Sussex. It is debated whether this was a torpedo or some other form of explosives, but either way, the Sussex was now on fire and partially submerged in the bay. So this would be the first of a couple of times that John would have to experience ships that he served aboard sinking, and he considered himself very lucky to have not been on board when the attack took place. So with his current ship now, half sunk in Edinburgh, he would actually return to the Royal Australian Navy, and on November 1940 was transferred to the HMAS Napier, which at the time was stationed in the North Atlantic. While aboard the Napier, he would carry out various patrols and U-boat hunting in the North Atlantic and escort convoys of supplies coming from the United States. On the 14th of April 1942, John was transferred once again to the HMAS Canberra and returned to Australia with the Canberra before undertaking patrol duties around New Guinea and escorting troop carriers bringing Australian troops up to New Guinea to support the ongoing Kokoda and eventually the Beachhead campaigns, as well as the Milne Bay campaigns. In June 1942, the HMAS Canberra was assigned to the US Task Force 44 and began supporting US operations in the Coral Sea, as well as the landings of US Marine and Army troops on Guadalcanal. And it was around this time, while it was stationed with Task Force 44, that on the 8th of August 1942, the Canberra would be taking part in the Battle of Savo Island. During the battle, which was a nighttime battle, the Japanese aircraft lit up the Canberra and one of the other ships in the convoy with flares, and the Canberra was subsequently struck with torpedoes, causing it to sink. The captain of the Canberra, as well as the the first officer, were killed or at least wounded and died as a result of the battle. And John was the third in command of the Canberra and the highest ranked officer to survive the attack. Now, I am actually going to read an account I have here from the Battle of Savo Island, which mentions John Plunkett-Cole during the battle. Sheets of enemy gunfire knocked out almost all the Canberra's guns and killed most of the gun crews. Fire roared through the ship. Her aircraft burned on the catapult like a taper. Lieutenant Commander John Plunkett-Cole, knocked to the deck and momentarily blinded, had his finger on the torpedo trigger. The ship was hit again. The torpedoes did not fire. Another shell struck and Plunkett-Cole was on his back, his overalls smouldering. He exclaimed, "I've been hit in the bum like a bloody sparrow." And while he lay there, other officers extinguished his smouldering clothes. After the Canberra was sunk and Plunkett-Cole was rescued among other survivors, he returned to Australia, and on the 14th of May 1943, upon receiving a promotion to the rank of commander, was given command of the HMAS Vendetta. The Vendetta undertook a number of escort and patrol duties up and along the north coast of Queensland, and in March 1944, he was pulled off the Vendetta and given command of the Nepal. The Nepal was subsequently attached to the British Eastern Fleet and undertook various duties in the Indian Ocean, largely then patrols and escort duty, as well as screening some of the larger battleships in the fleet. On April 1944, he took part in the Battle of Sabang, and on the 17th of May was involved in a strike against Surabaya, Java in Indonesia. Following this battle, the Nepal returned to Australia where it was to undergo refit and would be docked for several months. Plunkett-Cole was taken off command of the Nepal and subsequently given command of the HMAS Norman. The Norman would then undertake operations with the British fleets around Burma and eventually would actually be in a small grouping with the Nepal Vendetta and the Norman, who were all sister ships and coincidentally all at one point commanded by John Plunkett-Cole. One of his main duties with the Norman was escorting the British battleship HMS Elizabeth, as well as the British carrier HMS Amir. While in command of the Norman, the ship undertook successful operations in supporting the landings at Ramri. I may be horribly mispronouncing that, I do apologise. As well as other attacks on Cheduba Island and attacks on Sadu Island with the support of the HMAS Raider. The HMS Raider. Following all these operations, the Norman returned to Australia for a resupply and refit. And after completing these upgrades and these resupplies, was attached to the British Pacific Fleet, where it provided support for American ships going into Okinawa, as well as other British activities in the Pacific. He was in command of the Norman in the British Pacific Fleet when the Second World War came to an end, and on the 15th of August was one of the first Commonwealth ships to sail into Tokyo Harbour. If you go on the Australian War Memorial website and search John Plunkett-Cole, you'll actually see some fantastic photos of the man himself on the deck of the Norman overlooking, you can't really see Tokyo, as one of the British carriers is actually in the background blocking the view. Still, all the same, very good photos. Following the war, John decided to remain in the Navy, and in 1947 was made Commandant of the Royal Australian Naval College. He held this position until 1951, when on the 14th of March he was promoted to Captain and given command of the newly commissioned HMAS Anzac. The HMAS Anzac immediately set out for Sasebo, Japan, and would spend the next few months undertaking operations along the west coast of Korea in support of United Nations forces currently involved in the Korean War. These operations mostly entailed providing fire support for inland infantry attacks, bombarding North Korean positions and suspected strong points, and disrupting Chinese and North Korean supply lines with artillery support. Following this, by October 1951, the HMAS Anzac completed its relatively short tour of duty and returned to Sydney, where John Plunkett-Cole was relieved of command. He would subsequently be promoted to the rank of Commodore Class 2 and served as the aide-de-camp to the Governor-General of Australia for 3 years. Following this, he was stationed to the United Kingdom once again on loan to the Royal Navy. I've actually made a mistake. It was while he was in the United Kingdom that he received his promotion to Commodore Second Class. My apologies. By 1962, John Plunkett-Cole had actually reached the retirement age which is mandatory for naval personnel at the time. However, due to his advanced rank, they allowed him to stay in the Navy, and he served his country faithfully until 1966, when he retired from the service. Unfortunately, I don't know when what Mr. Plunkett-Cole did after his time in the Navy. I am also unsure when he passed away. I have at one point spoken to his son, and his son actually ended up serving in the Vietnam War down with the Australian Navy. But yeah, no, and as you can imagine, it's quite an important figure, of course. Two-war veteran, and you're reaching the rank of Commodore, captain of several ships, as well as commander of the Naval College. He had quite the career. And this jacket actually tells a lot of that history. So, like I said, it was made in 1933, just before he went over to England. But if you actually look on the cuffs, and although it's missing, you can faintly make out the rank of captain. So he was still wearing this into the early 50s at least. Um, but yeah, so overall, again, it is quite a lovely jacket. If we go around to the back here, it's a bit hard to see with the camera, but it's got these lovely long tail coats, again, with the brass gilt buttons. Um, but yeah, no, an incredible man with an incredible story and an incredible piece. Anyway, thank you very much for listening. If you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed. Uh, Stay tuned, and hopefully in the near future, I'll be reviewing yet another uniform.